My goodness.
Talk no more, none of that shit. I'm gonna let you say
Let's go, A.
got me started. Wrist frames carded. Pull up double parking. Don't even pay like I'm the owner. My young niggas retarded.
Yo, what up, guys? We're on the clock. It's Caleb back again with my lovely co-host Julian. How are we doing today, sir?
Look, man, we're doing the Ivy League. Got to take things seriously and have the suit jacket on. I mean,
I love
look,
it. I love it.
As you can see, I made the dean's list of the Duran Holmes show. Tyler, if you haven't known in the past, or you probably haven't heard very much of me in the past, but I have been a big Duran Holmes fan for a good year and a half. So
Good to know. He has plenty of fans out there.
love him.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, Julian mentioned we were joined by Tyler Metcalf from No Ceilings, the mad scientist over there, and we're really challenging him today and seeing his skills with the deep dive here at the Ivy League and A10. How are we doing, Metcalf?
Yeah, you guys sent me the A10 and Ivy League. I'm like, God, I didn't realize I was going to have to be diving this deep in September. But you know what? Here we are. You're keeping me on my toes, making me do my homework. So I'm excited for this one.
That's what I'm all about. It's all about the homework this time of year, especially getting kind of ahead of things. We're just gonna get right into it because I've been itching to talk about, really every single player in the entire country over the summer. But especially some of these lower conferences like the A10, where there's a lot of talent transferring in that I like. There's a lot of guys rising up that I think could have a lot of potential. But we're gonna start right at the tops. Julian mentioned Duran Holmes. A guy that I'll start off the conversation. I had legitimately a conversation for my top 40 last year before he decided to return back to school. And I think his hopes, and a lot of people's hopes, as you mentioned at the top of the podcast, Metcalf, it's a lot of people's hopes that he's going to be a guy that contends around, a top 22 lottery pick this year by returning to Dayton. What are kind of our hopes for Duran Holmes, Julian, going into the season?
Look, I love what he brings to the table from just an effort standpoint, first and foremost. Like, the dude works like day in, day out, runs all over the court setting screens, runs in the post, contests pretty much all over the court. I think if he has some semblance of a consistent jump shot, like, he could be a lottery pick. I'm like that confident in this guy, and just the amount of effort he puts into the game and the amount of passion he has for the game and the defensive talent, especially like the way that he makes reads, especially in the pick and roll. He switches really effectively, which has become like such a mainstay in the NBA today. And I think that like he has so many tools to be a modern big. And I think that if, teams start to see that a little bit more this year, I think Dayton could utilize him a bit more like a modern big. They've been posting him up a lot more than I think, most NBA teams would like to see. So I think if they just run him in pick and rolls till, beat a dead horse, beat them till they run it till they stop it, basically. I think he's a lottery.
Metcalf, what are kind of your perceptions of Duran Holmes? I'm sure that you dug deep into his film last year at some point.
Yeah, he's been a really interesting guy these last two seasons, really, just because of those athletic tools, the motor, the defense, the shot blocking, especially on jumpers where, he's blocking mid-range pull-ups out of the pick and roll. He's stepping up in drop coverage. That's a really tough skill. And he was arguably one of the best in the country at doing it these last two seasons. Julian touched on something really important, though, for me with his post-up game. It's really nice to see it kind of grow and evolve, and that footwork and the scoring touch and that versatility. And even last year, he started showing a little bit of, a simple pound dribble into a mid-range pull-up. Those are really good skills, but I almost want to see him dial it back and simplify his game a little more this year. And because he's not going to be doing that in the NBA. NBA teams are never going to ask him to post up. And last year he posted up on 44.5% of his possessions, and that's way too much. I'd like to see some more screening, some more rim running, some more short roll stuff, whether it's a floater or kicking out to the opposite corner. If they can really, and they're not going to because he's a dominant postman, but in the flashes that they do use him as that kind of screener and that pick and roll creator, I would like to see a little more diversity other than another pound dribble into a dunk or a pound dribble into a layup or just going up into a guy and drawing a foul. He drew a ton of fouls last year, really important skill, but I'd like to see a little more effectiveness, a little more versatility, and a lot of the times just a little more simplicity to his offensive game.
Yeah, I hear you. And I mean, Julian, you can kind of agree with me on this. These are kind of the similar conversations we had last offseason when me and you were hyping up as a guy who could be a lottery pick. We said the best moments that we saw from Deron Holmes, especially in close games, was his ability to create playmaking wise in the high post and also, out of the dribble handoff. I think that's something that we didn't really see a lot of last year, like Metcalf was talking about. I mean, really, they just tried to focus to get him on the ball in the paint, and not that it didn't work. You don't want to break what isn't fixed, or you don't want to fix what isn't broken. And he scored 56.4% of his possessions last year. So, he's going to be a dominant post-up threat, and I'd be curious to see if they even try at all to utilize him more as a playmaker. But I mean, the defensive upside has to be something that's talked about as just going to kind of solidify him as at least a draft pick, though. I mean, couldn't we agree all on that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And just the way that he defends in the pick and roll and the different coverages that you can use with him where, late in a shot clock, you can have him hedge and blitz and be a little more aggressive or regular flow of the offense. He can play that drop coverage. The way he grew as just an all-around pick and roll defender last year, it was really, really impressive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think on the defensive end of the court, he's well worth a pick in the early second round, in my opinion. Kind of moving to some of the other guys in the conference, sticking more with a guy who's probably going to be defined as just one of the best college scorers of recent memory for those that are paying attention. James Bishop IV, early in the season last year, was probably one of my favorite players to watch just because of the way he plays the game. Just your prototypical small undersized guard, shot creator. A lot of his shot selection reminds me of kind of vintage king of the fourth quarter Isaiah Thomas a lot of times at the beginning of the year. It just seemed like all of his step back shots were going in. I don't know. I have him as the player of the year in the conference. I think for those that are strictly college hoop heads, George Washington's going to be a team again that I think is going to be contending for the tournament just because they have such a prolific score. I mean, the top scorer in the conference is coming back this year, and that's not something me and Julian have been able to talk about so far with these previews. So I'm interested to see, did you get to dig it much into James Bishop IV, Metcalf?
Yeah. He's kind of just a funky player because it doesn't feel like he's a great athlete, but he always gets to his spots when creating his own shot. He's got a really tight handle, really crafty on ball, especially out of the pick and roll. I mean, he was in the 88th percentile, scoring out of the pick and roll. Just some random stat I found on Bartorovic was since 2008, he's one of 19 players with a usage rate of at least 31, which is super high. Usage rate of at least 31, assist rate of at least 28, again, super high, and a turnover rate under 15. Super low. Some of the other notables who hit that were Kemba Walker, Damian Lillard, Norris Cole, Nate Walters, Carlik Jones, Campaign. The rest on the list didn't really pan out in the league at all, but there's some impressive names on that list. And, he's kind of one of these ball dominant, versatile scoring guards who's just a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I definitely think that in this conference, he's one of the treats, especially viewing wise. If you get the chance, it's definitely worth tuning in. Very similar to the Jelly Walker train at UAB last year, in my opinion. Just, worth tuning in once in a while. Kind of moving down, I saw you tweeted today, Metcalf, I'm always surfing the Twitter. Let's talk about Matt Cross from UMass. And I listed him earlier this week as a guy that I had as a first teamer, just because I think that he can do everything well. And then on top of that, I think he's just going to be a stable scoring presence for UMass. And they lost RJ Lewis. So, I mean, they lost a guy who was probably going to hop up and be a premier scoring option on that team. I think Matt Cross is going to fill that role just fine this year again for UMass.
I loved his film when I was catching up on it and going back through it. I got kind of some like Jaime Jaquez vibes with his bully ball play, the off ball movement, the cutting, the spot up shooting, just the motor, the team defense, just doing all the dirty work that no one else on the court really ever wants to do. And then you factor in his size, his athleticism. It's like, God, there's some fun stuff here. There's never really it doesn't seem like there's going to be any on ball stuff with him, but as that kind of guy who just fills in the gaps, works harder than everyone else on the court, is physical scorer, good cutter, reliable spot up shooter. It's like, God, UMass has a really, really interesting off ball presence here.
Yeah, and I think with bringing in Hankins Sanford from South Carolina, they're going to have a really, really stable presence in the front court that I kind of enjoy. And I think that they're a team in this conference that's going to be a sleeper. I don't know if they'll have the backcourt guys to pick it up, but I know that there's a freshman that I haven't watched, but I mean, just by his pure size, tell me a little bit about Mayock from what you watched earlier this week. Julian standing at 7'3" out of South Sudan.
So there's not a ton of film, which makes it tough. But from what I watched, oh my goodness, this kid is 7'3", which is obviously like in itself ridiculous. But he uses his long arms to like pass and like be a presence around the rim. I have not seen him shoot a jumper. I honestly probably doubt that he has a coherent jumper at this stage of his career. Otherwise, he probably would have been much more highly touted. But I just think as a guy who stands around the rim and blocks shots and like can dish out to guys like Matt Cross on the perimeter, I mean, I think this guy's going to be super entertaining, and I think he's going to get some playing time. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. UMass was like kind of middle of the road last year. I think there's a point in the season where if they're middle of the road again, they throw the 7'3" guy out there and say, like, go have fun. Let's see what you can do. And I think if he gets some play, it's going to be really, really interesting. I have him as my freshman of the year, which I think is a bit optimistic. But I do think, like, just with the size and the length and, like, the passing was what really stuck out to me. If this kid can really pass in college,
yeah,
it's
be interesting to see.
Very scary.
Yeah, I just thought it was notable. I read a little bit about his from his bio, and then on some of the guys, especially in the A10, I was doing just a little bit of background research, and he was a guy that had like some pretty high remarks about him early on, just about his long-term potential. I think he'll be a guy that maybe not the rest of the year we talk about or next year, but I think down the road is a notable name. Another guy that I think will be a notable name down the road is Robert Davis Jr., who I was watching a bit of yesterday and seems like a pretty electric presence at the wing. I think could make some noise this year as a freshman. And then also Jalen Curry, a small guard out of Charlotte, who I was kind of impressed with. I was able to actually watch a bit of him earlier today, and I enjoyed his stuff off the dribble. I think he's going to be a stable playmaker, and I don't know. I think that UMass has some freshman talent. I just want to give them some love because we're probably not going to talk about them the rest of the time. Kind of return to the top of the conference. I want to talk about Day Grant and Duquesne. Julian, what are we loving about Day and the rest of the boys at Duquesne this year? I have a lot of guys on my radar that are from the squad.
So for Duquesne, so there's two factors. One, obviously, like, what can Day do in general? Well, that's a fun little saying. What can Day do? Look, he's one of the best. I mean, I would say best scorer in the conference, but James Bishop exists. So, it's in most conferences, he would probably be, amongst the leading scorers. But I actually don't think that he's the guy that's going to take them over the top. I honestly think it's Stephen Clark, Jack Clark, Jimmy Clark. That's it. I know I'll get there eventually. I think the guy to watch out for Duquesne is going to be Jimmy Clark, because we know what Day can do. I know they have another couple of guys on that roster that we know what they can do, whose names are just been a long day forgetting me at the moment. But if Jimmy Clark
I got you.
can,
I'll pick
he's
it
a,
up the rear.
he's a very like athletic guard who's a streaky shooter and kind of shows these little flashes of brilliance. I think if him and Day can put together a really solid backcourt for this Duquesne team, like VCU, we're going to talk about, I know at some point, is kind of like
Deplenished.
on the they're on the downtrend. Like Dayton, like they had so much talent last year and kind of like screwed the pooch. I wouldn't be surprised if this Duquesne team comes out and like demolishes the field. They were good last year, and I'm surprised they kept Day Grant. But I mean, that backcourt is going to be really, really interesting, and I'm excited to watch them play this year.
Yeah, I mean, out of the classic guards that kind of Day Grant and James Bishop fall into, they're kind of the rare guys that were able to stick. I mean, if you look at another guy that kind of falls into that category is Jamarcus Sharp, who was for Northwestern State last year, and he moved up, and a lot of the guys of this smaller guard stature that are kind of microwave scorers move up. So I think that you made a great point that a player like him returning could spark a lot for them when there's weaker backcourts in the conference. I mean, like you mentioned, a lot of the VCU guys moved along to Penn State. And then a guy that I'm going to ask Metcalf here, if he got a chance to watch, was David Dixon. I think this kid was a sophomore last year who was an absolute dog. And I think that these type of players, when they're going to be kind of coming into their own as an upperclassman, who does a little bit of everything and has some shooting, like real shooting potential, like his jumper is legit. I think when you can identify these small uprising players and look at the senior talent on that team, they kind of look like the perfect storm to me to make a run to the tournament. And, when we're talking conferences specifically, it's hard to look and see if there's a better team than Duquesne this year, in my opinion. I don't know. What do you think, Metcalf?
Yeah, and Day was really, really impressive, especially as that off-ball scorer, off-ball shooter, like 88th percentile, spotting up, and like 78th on running off of screens. Those type of guys typically don't stick around schools like Duquesne for a long time. So, and defensively, I didn't think he was special, but there's some defensive playmaking stuff there and he at least competed. The fundamentals need a lot of work, but off-ball shooters like that, those are typically the guys who in their junior, senior seasons are transferring to a Power 5 program to then, be that sixth man off the bench and just live the dream of just gunning threes all game. So kind of surprised that he didn't make that transfer. I think David Dixon is really kind of the swing player for this Duquesne team. Super raw. It was really frustrating when you just go through his game log and seeing the minutes where it's like 2, 15, 4, 5. It's like
how I felt watching you do Thiero last year for Kentucky.
It was awful. So he's still super raw. So I kind of get it. And the hope is that he really takes a big jump this year. And last year, 93rd percentile as an at-rim finisher. I think he has really good defensive tools, really good motor, really good physical tools. He just barely played last year. So I'm really hoping that he gets the opportunity this year and takes that leap that it feels like is just kind of waiting to be unleashed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The defensive tools, you said it, are the things that pop to me the most that really could swing his evaluation just as a player in general, and even as a possible draft prospect. I think he has some legitimate athleticism that should be noted, and his motor, like you said, is one of a kind, at least in my opinion, especially in this conference. I don't know if there's anybody that quite is playing at the effort level that he is. Some guys that I think that are also some swings to get better. I don't know if you guys watched much UNLV last year, but Keyshawn Hall is a guy transferring to George Mason who I think could be a factor early this season as somebody who kind of pops as a scoring score first guard. 6'7", dropped down to probably about 220. This offseason was probably more at like 250 last year. And I think he has some real potential as a guy who could just kind of do a little bit of everything for a George Mason team that seems like they're trying take a step in the right direction. And I think bringing in a guy like Keyshawn Hall and giving him the keys early, they brought in a transfer from Virginia Tech and East Tennessee State and not Oklahoma State, but they brought in some other guys that are younger, like Austin Ball, a big guard out of Virginia that I really liked. I think that they have some really interesting pieces that, over at least the next 2 years, they're going to be a team that I'm monitoring. And Keyshawn Hall is a guy next year, is just one of these players that maybe a little bit more of a swing than David Dixon because he doesn't really have a high floor. But if he puts it together with the extra increase in usage, could be a guy that pops. I don't know if either of you were able to watch much of him, but Metcalf, were you able to watch much Keyshawn Hall?
Just a little bit. I was really impressed with his just physicality in the post on both ends and how big he was. He felt like he was still like really light on his feet, where he would just lower that big shoulder into defender's chest and spin off him the other way and finish at the rim. 98th percentile in post up. His scoring possessions, the sample is super low, just because the opportunity wasn't always there for him. So those numbers can be pretty skewed, but still 98th percentile is 98th percentile. So I thought the jumper still looked solid. Again,
That's one thing I definitely want to see change up a little bit.
Yeah. So it's, what is it going to look like when he gets more minutes? Because I'm assuming that's the whole point of going from UNLV to George Mason is, hey, my minutes are going to triple and I'm going to be in the starting lineup every night. So can that efficiency translate to a larger minute load? And can the conditioning keep up with it?
Yeah, that's definitely the narratives that I'm going to be following along with him. Just an exciting piece. Another guy that's kind of in the similar boat. Before we kind of turn to back to kind of the staples of this conference, veteran wise, but Zach Montgomery for Rhode Island is a guy that I've been kind of preaching to Julian that could be a factor scoring wise for Rhode Island. Bringing him in along with some other guys, again, another one of these teams that's kind of retooling through the transfer portal. And at Bradley last year, didn't get a ton of minutes, but when he did, was a consistent kind of piece of their rotation who could be relied on to provide late game scoring, especially. There's some moments that I was able to clip together last year where he had some tears down the stretch, closing out games as a scorer and as a player, really on both ends, getting steals, playing in the passing lanes, a dynamic athlete in the fast break. And, similar to George Mason, Rhode Island's another team bringing in a guy around the third. There's some fun things with this team. They got a guy named Always Right, and there's some other talent with Jaden House coming in, and Always Right, like I said, is a top JUCO player that I was able to watch a little bit. And there's some real backcourt talent. And like I was saying before at the top, and why I want to highlight them is there's some real gaps in this conference, with VCU kind of having the last couple of years a staple of backcourt players that were dynamic defensively. Dayton had, Mongolian Mike last year, and definitely more depth than they have this year. Rhode Island's a team that I kind of look to and say that they can make a push with some of these high tempo guards. Were you able to watch any of these guys, particularly Zach Montgomery, Julian?
Yeah, I was a big Zach Montgomery guy. I think the big thing with him is consistency, because he can kind of score in bunches, and he can also, it could have just been the way that Bradley was kind of utilizing him. But when I was watching Bradley, it would kind of be is it Zach or Zeke? How are we doing this? Zach?
Yeah.
Zach. Like they'd kind of let him take over for a little bit, and then you'd kind of see him kind of, drift into oblivion in the offense at times. And I think at a school like Rhode Island, and I think this is an interesting thing with both him and Keyshawn Hall, is that when you have teams where you're transferring in a lot of guys, it's kind of like a little bit of like a Hunger Games thing, where it's like whoever shows out the best early is like going to be given the keys, because they don't really know how all these guys are going to perform in their system. And so I think like Montgomery, if he gets on one of his tears early in the season, could very easily be the staple of this Rhode Island offense. Caleb, I know you pointed out the defensive stuff. I love him as a two-way player as well. So I think like just on that alone, I mean, he's going to probably be seeing 25, 30 at least minutes a game. It's just going to be a matter for him of like, how much is he going to have the ball and be given the will to dominate? Is he going to be the guy that, 5 minutes to go in a 5-point game, they say, Zach, go win us this game, And I think he can be. It's kind of up to him to prove that early in the season, though, because, there's a bunch of other guys coming in the transfer portal who are also trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. I think you summed it up pretty well, Metcalf. Do you have any notes on any of the Rhode Island guys?
For me, Montgomery is the one that really stands out, like you guys are saying. I like the defense. I agree with Julian that he's kind of just seemed to disappear for stretches, and that always really concerns me with guys, especially, not to dog Bradley, but at that level, it's like I should feel you on the court all the time. But the big selling point with him is just the off ball shooting, 83rd percentile in spot up, 46.6% shooting off the catch. They should be running stuff for this guy constantly. And I just really hope that he doesn't get stuck with a point guard who fancies himself his own shot a ton.
Yeah.
So if someone's willing to set him up, and if they're willing to run stuff for him, and he's willing to, do that and, call for the ball and really take his off ball movement to the next level, there's some pretty scary off ball shooting upside with him.
Yeah. I again hit it on the nose. His ability to kind of attack closeouts is really exciting, and I think something that turns him into a real threat down the stretch in games, especially when the jumper's going. Moving towards some other guys, I don't know if either of you guys have watched much Ben Schweiger, but he's a guy that I've been hearing a little bit about out of Loyola as a big guard who could be somebody to watch in the A10 this year. Again, Loyola is one of those schools in this conference, kind of similar to Davidson, as you never know when they're going to pop on any given year, with just kind of the prolonged success that and stability they've had as programs. Loyola is kind of retooling. I don't know. But did you guys get to watch much of the limited Ben Schweiger last year?
Julian, go ahead. I thought he was a good slasher. The shot was a little funky for me. Kind of gonna have to be one of those guys. I'm gonna have to see it this year before I get real excited about it. But I very easily could have missed something. So
yeah, give me a sec. I have notes on him somewhere in here. I remember there was something about I was surprised about something. Hold on.
I think the biggest thing that just popped to me was kind of his size, positionally. Like you said, as a slasher, I think another one of these guys I'm kind of swinging on here in the A10 as a big guard who could provide upside early if he gets the touches, like a common theme we've been talking about with a lot of these last couple of guys. Even kind of stretching back to George Washington, Benny Schroeder is a guy who, got a lot of touches in U19 overseas. And I would be interested to see if he takes a step after playing for Germany and, kind of showed out in the U19s. Did you get to watch much of his U19 film, Metcalf, by chance? He was he was definitely playing, kind of out of his mind for a couple games.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to the U19 stuff yet, which, I saw your prep document and, saw that he was in there. So I'm like, I checked out the wrong film, because what I'm watching at Oklahoma, I'm not getting it. I think there's some spot up shooting stuff there, but it's like, oh God, the handle, he's fumbling it off his leg every time he tries to put it on the floor. The athleticism didn't seem to be there. So it may have been just a confidence situation thing where he was just done, which wouldn't be shocking seeing that he's no longer there. So I'll have to go back and check out the U19 stuff, because I was like, oh, I think I picked the wrong team.
He definitely impressed me off the dribble with some of his playmaking. I would make note of some of his passing, even on plays that, just some of that niche stuff where it's not even on plays that are assists. It's just some of the basic decision making. I thought that when he was comfortable in a team setting, he looked He looked a lot better than he did at Oklahoma. I think that he'll just be a good piece that can play alongside a guy like Bishop and kind of develop around older guards. Went to Oklahoma, clearly has to have enough talent to get recruited there in the first place. So I guess it's gonna be a matter of time before we see that get tapped into. Another guy that me and Julian have watched a bit that we like is Reed Bailey out of Davidson. Do you want to kind of take this one over, Julian? I know that you got to watch a bit of him early this year.
Yeah, I really like the Reed Bailey offensive stuff. Defensively, it's kind of going to be a struggle. He's not the most mobile of guys out
Not
there.
very athletic, just saying.
No, he's not. And I like from a prospect perspective, I don't think he's ever going to get there defensively. But what I do really like about him is his inside to outside game. Really good post player, can do a lot of the dirty work down low, gets in deep, makes good reads down low. And then on the outside as well, he can kind of do the little pick and pop thing where you can't really just ignore him at the top of the key because he can shoot it. And I think that that's going to be a big part of Davidson's offense this year is they're probably going to be a team that, is trying to go 5 out, shoot the hell out of the ball. They have a couple of guys coming back. I know they got Menenga coming back. They did lose Foster Lawyer, which stinks, but I do think Reed Bailey is going to be a big part of their offense. I really like Akil Spadone for them too. He's a nice little spark pluggy player that can shoot the three. So I think, look, the defense isn't going to be there. It never was. He's going to get dominated by like Deron Holmes and some of the other, big time bigs in this conference, of which there honestly aren't that many. But offensively, he's going to tire guys out.
Yeah,
That's
I
that's all I
agree.
got on him.
I was if you read a bit into his profile and some of the things that the coaching staff is saying about him is he's going to see a good amount of touches of the point guard position, which is interesting at his size. They're going to get him some touches out of the high post, and it'll be interesting to see how some of that decision making. I thought he was relatively proficient playmaking last year, and it definitely didn't click with me that this was a guy that you'd want to see running a bit of offense, but I don't know what Davidson's doing. But that if you read his player profile on Davidson's website, it's what they're saying about him. So it'll be interesting to say the least. But at 6'11", I don't know, Julian, did you think anything of the playmaking that would make you think that would be a successful venture?
Enough is like maybe some cool post up, kick out stuff. I didn't see like I'm nothing. Oh man, I'm like trying to figure out how to phrase this in the most polite way possible. I didn't really see too much like off the dribble stuff that would really entice me to believe that like
That's what
this
I'm
like
saying.
like when I think 6'10" point guard or I think like Ben Simmons or Cade Cunningham, like and given like those guys don't have the slickest handle in the world, I get that, but like they're guys who can go from coast to coast and are like looking for guys on either side as they're going down the floor. I like maybe like a Sabonis-y kind of like point guard role at best. I don't see that at all. That's confusing to me.
Metcalf, I feel like you concur. Yeah, I was pretty underwhelmed by Reed Bailey. I think I think he's got really good floor vision. Some of like the inside out passing stuff where he was like that connector between especially like being the guy in the middle of zones and spraying it out to the corner and stuff. I don't know. I don't see the point guard stuff with him at all. I would like him to be a little more aggressive, like with scoring and stuff, where he was a little too fixated on making those kick out passes, where it's like just turn over your right shoulder and you have a wide open 8-foot jumper. Please take it. It's here. So I think he's a really smart player. I don't think he's necessary. I don't think he's going to be one of those guys where he hurts your team, but I'm not sure how much he's elevating it. Someone they brought off the bench last year that kind of impressed me a lot was David Skogman. I think he's like 6'10", backup center, 87th percentile on jumpers. Their D rating ranked 106 when he was on the court, dropped to 273rd when he was off the court. Not a stellar athlete or rim protector or anything like that, but a little bit of ball skills, some defensive awareness, can spread the floor a little bit, move the ball like everyone on Davidson can. So I thought he was kind of an interesting name to keep an eye on.
Fair enough. Definitely a name that I'll add to our sheet here as we're moving into the start of the season. We're always learning. And another guy that I'm kind of looking forward to seeing take a step forward, kind of just, continuing to move some of these guys that I think will have ample playing time hopefully this year, is a couple guys for VCU. I have Toibu Lawal, who is a guy that I don't know if either of you got to watch much last year. I know that I've sent Julian on the way to watch the film just because of the athletic tools. And this is a guy that I think if gets the right amount of playing time could be a potential reminds me a lot of Cowderici. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last name, but I think at his floor is a dynamic athlete that I think is notable in this conference because I think he has major shot blocking upside and kind of could be a presence as a lob threat, and seeing what kind of VCU puts together with the new head coach this next year. I don't really know what their team's going to look like. Obviously losing their two top guards to Penn State along with their head coach. So it'll be interesting to see what their roster shakes out to be. But with Toby Lawal and my boy Alonzo Fats Billups,
What a name.
it's gonna Alfonso Fats Billups.
Love it.
He goes by Fats because he was a fat little baby and it just carried on. So I think they're going to be a fun team. They brought in Kwani from California, who's going to be a stable scoring option for them. I don't know. They're kind of just a team that I think has been a consistent presence in this conference, and it's worth noting with a couple of these guys that, I don't know, generally pop as possible guys who could take a step, being, I don't know, I think Lawal's an undersized big probably, but Fats Billups is an oversized guard. So interesting, players to look at, but come on, Julian, you got anything on the wall?
I mean, I like Lawal. He's very, very athletic. We know what he can do as a lob threat. We know he kind of just does like the general, 6'8" athletic dude stuff. I say that like most 6'8" people can do that stuff, but and in basketball, it seems to be commonplace of like the Derrick Jones Jr. archetype, except Derrick Jones Jr. eventually had to develop a jump shot, and obviously Toibu Lawal is not Derrick Jones Jr. But I mean, like by saying that, you get the concept. I'm actually excited about Sean Bairstow going to VCU. I think he was one of the best players from Utah State. Other than Funk and Ashworth, like I think it was a big loss for them. VCU is going to need someone who can put ball in hoop, especially from outside the top of the key. Since they don't, I'm assuming whoever they're bringing in is going to run some form of chaotic defense that's been a staple of VCU culture since Shaka Smart was there. So I'm assuming that their big issue is going to be scoring the ball. And, Bairstow can do that, especially from outside. And I think that, he's going to be the guy that they're going to rely on to drill threes when they need threes. And, like I said with Lawal, like he's going to be their rim protection. He's going to be their inside presence. And, that like again, not to keep reiterating points I've said already, but there's not a lot of bigs in this conference. So, a 6'8" dude who can jump is very feasible as your rim protector, especially when like most of these bigs also aren't very athletic. So I think, VCU is not going to be as bad as, dominant as they were, but they're not going to be bad by any stretch of the imagination, I don't think.
Yeah, no, they brought in Utah State's coach, which is why they brought in Bairstow. So I think that they'll be interesting enough. And I think if anything, they'll be able to get Ryan Odom, if I'm not mistaken, was Utah State's coach last year. I think he'll be able to get a little bit out of some of these younger guys. He was able to utilize Funk and Ashworth to the best of their ability. So I'm looking forward to it. Some St. Joe's guys that I think are worth the time before we maybe pivot over to the Ivy League, because there's some guys in there that we should definitely talk about before we close up. But I think there's a good handful of guys that we could spend a little bit of time on. What did you like from Eric Reynolds II last year, Metcalf?
He's just such a fun scorer. If you need a bucket, he's going to get you a bucket plus another 12. 88th percentile scoring overall, 95th percentile in spot up, where he shot 42.9% from three, 89th percentile on pull-ups. Then you add in some of the fun playmaking flashes. The defense is what it is. The rebounding is what it is. The decision making is a little erratic, but with guys who can put up points and get buckets like that, especially in the A10, it's always going to be that way. So you just kind of have to live with it. But when you have scoring and shooting rankings like he does, it's a really, really special skill that a lot of guys in this type of conference don't typically have. He's one of the more special scorers in this conference, if not the most special.
Yeah, definitely efficiency wise, he's kind of in a class of his own. I think he really goes up there with the Ron Holmes in terms of the guys that you would put up there in a conversation. If I want a bucket out of the A10, there's a guy I'm going to. And they brought in some decent recruits. They brought two guys out of Philadelphia, actually three guys out of Philadelphia, with Xavier Brown, Sean Simmons II, and Anthony Finkley. I only got to go watch Sean Simmons II because I saw a 6'6" guard, and we all know how draft heads' brains work when they see that. And I liked a little bit what I saw, just kind of your prototypical 6'6" off guard, decent shooter. And I think he'll be notable enough. I don't think he's going to take any minutes from Eric Reynolds or anything like that, but a player to definitely know going forward. Did you get to watch Finkley or Brown, Julian?
No, but I did get to watch. I got to watch Reynolds, obviously, and I got to watch a bit of Rasheer Fleming.
Yes.
Who I'm interested in. I'm curious. I mean, like, I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to go right for him to take the next step. Like, the shooting has to get better. He's a little bit raw with the ball, but I think there's like, with those two guys, I mean, I'm gonna get to see St. Joe's. If you don't know Metcalf, I'm Philly based, so
Okay.
I will happily go to some St. Joe's games and let you know how Rasheer Fleming looks.
Please do.
As well as getting to see some Eric Reynolds, get to see some Big Six. But I'm excited for the St. Joe's team. You know, like them and LaSalle, like, it's weird. They weren't very good in conference last year, but they both had like surprisingly good A10 tournaments. Which I think is like, especially LaSalle. Like LaSalle, you know, made it, I think, to the quarterfinals ish. Which, like, given that, you know, they were a middling A10 team throughout the year, I don't know, maybe one of those teams breaks through. And if Eric Reynolds is doing Eric Reynolds things, I don't see why it couldn't be St. Joe's. No Philly bias at all whatsoever. But St. Joe's is winning the A10.
I think that they're definitely a dark horse for sure. Speaking of dark horse, before we wrap up, St. Louis, what does St. Louis say to you that makes you think that they're a dark horse, Metcalf? Because I had them kind of in the back of my mind, but shifted otherwise. I put two big men for them that could potentially be breakout players as freshmen.
Yeah, when after, so I dove into the tape on a couple of their returners, liked a lot of what I saw, went back and, you know, right before we kind of hopped on and just did another once over of their roster. I was like, oh crap, this is a lot younger than I thought it was going to be. I think they have like 6 or 7 freshmen coming in, which is yikes. But first, the man who has arguably the most absurd name in the entire universe, Gibson Jimerson.
I love that man.
It's absurd. It's ridiculous, and his parents need to be investigated. But I was so much more impressed with him than I initially thought I was going to be. His defense was really impressive, really good footwork. really good off ball awareness. He was typically taking the tougher assignment. I think he's listed at like 6'6", 6'7". And he was matching up with guys like James Bishop, or David Bishop, the whoever the primary scoring.
Bishops, the Grants, the Reynolds.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just mind went blank. 84th percentile spot up scorer, really good off ball mover, constantly moving, running off screens, relocating, almost nothing on ball. But there were some real like Max Strus vibes with how he played. And then a guy who kind of kept coming off their bench and is, I think, the big wild card for St. Louis, where if he does take this jump, then they're at them as a team are going to as well. And that was Sincere Parker. Super low usage, but really good shooter. Again, low volume, but 99th percentile pick and roll scoring, 89th percentile spot up scoring. If he can translate just a little bit of that, obviously not to that level, but stick around 70th percentile in both those categories while double or tripling his minutes or usage, then I think St. Louis has some really fun kind of upperclassmen scoring options.
I love Gibson Jimerson. He was a guy who, like, I went in, I was like, oh, this guy, his numbers off the, just kind of like off the Basketball Reference, they look decent. Like, let me check this guy out. Then you go into the film and you just watch him like sprint around the court for about, 15, 20 seconds until eventually he gets open. And you think, okay, well, so he's just like, your regular 3-point shooter who runs around all the time. Like, there's no way he's a good defender. And like Metcalf, like you said, like, he's surprisingly like a legit defender. Like, he sticks with guys. He has like really good court awareness. I guess like that probably stems from the fact that he is always trying to run around and find his like spots when he's on offense. So it like makes sense that defensively he would have that same level of court awareness. What I really like about him that's interesting is like they don't just have him like running off screens all the time. They'll sometimes have him set screens and then run. And like the way that they use him specifically is really, really interesting. And like it's tough to kind of have that guy be the focal point of your offense, especially when you don't have Yuri Collins feeding him, which I think is going to be their biggest detriment. But like the looks that, I mean, if they keep running the sets that they've been running for him, he's going to be open, and it doesn't really, like, I could be passing him the ball and I could hit the passes that, are going to be open because he's going to be that wide open. So I think he makes them really interesting. So does Sincere Parker. Like you said, Brock, I just called you Rucker for a second. Brain fart.
Metcalf, remember what happened. We get onto our podcast of the War Room, and I go on there. Oh, I'm here joined by Tyler Rucker. I immediately go, oh my God, it's the most embarrassing thing ever. It's only because we just had Rucker on.
No, it's cool. I get it. Just make a note. No worries.
You're our favorite, Tyler. Don't talk about
it. But yeah, SLU's going to be fun. I think that there's a couple of other teams that I like a little bit better as dark horses personally. But that's more just because I think like SLU's just going to be good and like be in the mix. I don't know if they're going to get over the top. But I think they're going to be in the mix with like, I guess we could say VCU. I'm still unsure of what I think about VCU. But I guess we'll say VCU for argument's sake. Dayton, again, for argument's sake, because I have no faith in Dayton. And like, I guess, is Duquesne going to win the A10 this year? Is that kind of like an okay conclusion? Like, I don't know, man.
I think the best performing backcourt takes it. And I think unless Deron Holmes puts out 20 and 12 in conference play,
which he could.
Then I think it's hard to argue against Dayton, but I don't know. Like I said earlier, I think Dayton is depleted. I think VCU is depleted, and I think it's Duquesne's conference to lose. At least in my opinion. I think George Washington could give them a run for their money. I think there's a lot of teams here in kind of the middle, and it could turn out to be one of the more competitive conferences that we kind of cover in this like top like 8-ish kind of conferences in the country, I think consistently. Moving on to a conference that maybe isn't at the top of people's minds, but All I can think about this offseason is the Ivy League. And as crazy as it may be to say, I think that there's some real talent in this conference, and specifically a couple guys, and we'll get to them. But can we just talk about Yale for a second? I don't know if there's a team in the country that returned as many top scorers as they did. I've been kind of cruising through. I think Wisconsin is the only team I've seen so far, at least a Power 5 team, that's returned as many top scorers. I think Yale returned their top 4 scorers this season from last year. I think the only other team I've seen do that is Wisconsin, like I said. So I don't know. Metcalf, you kind of agreed with me that their big three of Nowlin, Mahoney, and Pulakidis are going to kind of return as 3 of the top players in this conference. What do you think about Yale this year? And could they be a team? I mean, we saw Princeton make a run last year. Could this be Yale's turn to kind of be a dark horse team out of the Ivy League?
I don't think they have a chance of doing what Princeton did last year, just because I think Princeton still had a decent amount of size, and the athleticism of Tosan really covered up a lot that 99% of Ivy League players can't do. And he was able to do that, and that kind of covered up a lot of stuff. And then they ran some really creative stuff. But kind of just running through like the advanced numbers with like August Mahoney and John, I'm going to call him P. It was insane where they ranked in these. And I was just like, good Lord, what happened? August Mahoney, spot up, 100th percentile, pick and roll ball handler, 92nd percentile, transition, 85th percentile. Johnny P, pick and roll ball handler, 90th percentile, spot up, 90th percentile, handoffs, 93rd percentile. I was like, holy crap. So getting that efficiency and that volume back, it's going to be huge for them. And then just Matt Nolan he just kind of kept standing out when I was going through tape. It's just kind of that 3-and-D glue guy who just did a little bit of everything, and again was really efficient.
Yeah, he doesn't really do much wrong, in my opinion. It's kind of my takeaways from the tape is that he's going to be a steady presence for that team. And I mean, you're talking about 3 guys that all averaged over a point per possession last year. And if that's not consistency, I don't know what it is. So it'll be interesting to see. I think they have to be far and away the favorites. I mean, I figured we'd get that kind of duller conversation away because they're just so good. I think the only other player that we could talk about for a prospect perspective is Bez Mabang, who was the defensive player of the year last year in the Ivy League. And as a guard, his tape kind of popped to me as somebody who could be interesting to monitor as a junior at 6'4", who can really defend 1 through 4, in my opinion. Another one of these kind of switchable Swiss Army knife type of players. Did you have much impressions? To me, he kind of jumped off the tape towards the end of the year. But I don't know where either of you guys stand on Bez.
So I didn't get a chance to watch Bez, but I do want to say just a little contrast to Metcalf here. I think Yale can win a game in this tournament.
A game, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. I like 2 games is possible, but like they kind of have the making of a Cinderella team if you look at it. They have a lot of returning players. They have 2 really good defenders. Well, I wouldn't say Wolf is as good as Bang, but Wolf's a 7-foot. That's enough to deal with the team that has Taco Fall or not. You know what I mean? The team that has the one big dude and 4
Marion Sharp, Connor Van
Marion Sharp, Zach Eady, Omar Ballo. I could go on. But anyway, they shoot the hell out of the ball.
Yeah.
And 3-point shooting can win in March. And, it was kind of surprising that they didn't end up making it last year over that Princeton team. But, I mean, Tosin's gone. And all that's left is all of Yale's shooters, all of the players who actually played for them last year. Like, they literally brought, even their role players back. They brought everyone back to a team that, won the Ivy League regular season and, was a game away from the tournament. I think they, I would be surprised, but, at the same time, I wouldn't be shocked if they made the Sweet 16 summit.
Wow. I love it.
This is not me saying that Yale is going to the Sweet 16.
No,
Let me
you
get
just
that on
guaranteed it.
record.
We got it on tape.
This is
We'll
this is
see.
where, this is where we return back to in February. And we
It's
look
gonna
at
get
this
clipped
and just say,
together of me say it's gonna get clipped together where I say the word Yale Sweet 16 and guarantee, and all of a sudden it's gonna sound see just right there. I said Yale Sweet 16 and guarantee, and now all of a sudden apparently
"Yep."
Yale is
I mean,
guaranteed.
that'll be on the clock YouTube channel, ladies and gentlemen. As we can upload videos that are longer than 10 minutes, which would be great. um, Devin Austin for Princeton is a guy that I've been itching to talk about for, I don't know, ever, as long as I can remember, at least. And another guy that Metcalf identified here on our little prep doc is Xavier Lee. These two rising sophomores for Princeton kind of get me a little excited, because I mean, we're just saying how Yale is far and away this team that, if we think about recent memory, is a kind of a powerhouse in some of these smaller conferences. You're telling me three guys that are consistently putting up, 12 to 16 points a night, and you're getting consistent and efficient scoring. I mean, how are you going to knock a team like this off without an NBA caliber talent like a Tosin? And I think they have a guy, in my opinion, Devin Austin, who could be a sleeper guy as an NBA caliber talent because of his combination of pure shooting ability and athleticism. I think that they have a player like Xavier Lee who could be a prominent lead guard on a college basketball team, and they could make some noise, maybe not this year, but in the next 2 years, 3 years. This is a backcourt duo that I'm going to keep a close eye on in college basketball. And I'd be very, very, very curious to see if this is not a pair of guys that transfer out of Princeton next year and are both playing for Power 5 schools. How do you feel about these guys, Metcalf?
Yeah, and with Austin, just the off ball shooting. I know I sound like a broken record going back to it so many times with these guys, but in these kind of conferences, that's a huge skill to have and can be a game changer for most of these teams. Is lethal. He's like over the, I think, 91st percentile spotting up, super impressive. I think Xavier Lee could really be a game changer for this Princeton team. Going back to FIBA U19 over the summer, he was incredible for Canada. He led them in scoring per game at 14.1 points per game. That's over guys like Michael Nwoko, center who's going to Miami. That's over guys like Elijah Fisher, another D1 guy.
Oh.
That's really impressive. He's super quick, super crafty, really creative scorer, really creative passer. I think him and Austin are going to be able to run some really fun stuff in that Princeton offense. And, they're sophomores, so there's probably going to be a bit of a learning curve, especially in a league like the Ivy that tends to have a lot of upperclassmen with the best teams. But, you look 1-2 years in the future, they could be really, really, really good on this Princeton team if they stay.
Yeah, I don't know. Austin kind of pops to me as a guy who, in some of his flashes, if he makes a jump, I think he could be a superstar caliber player that we're looking at in the Ivy League as a younger player. I think like I was saying at the beginning, I think he has an underrated combination of just a pure shooting stroke and some real athleticism. And is a guy that, I don't know if he's quite on my top, 200, 300 radar to start the year, but he's definitely nearing that conversation. And so is Xavier Lee, because I don't know, they're both just so fun to watch, and have a hard time not wanting to make time every week to watch a Princeton game or two. And kind of moving on down, I think it's hard to kind of continue this conversation without going right to Nazir Williams, a guy that me and Julian were talking about a lot today, who at 6'3", was just kind of a wrecking ball, and in the Ivy League last year for Cornell. And I just don't see a world where this guy doesn't touch the ball as much as he wants to next year. I don't know.
No,
Just pick it up where I left it.
Look, he's clearly going to be the best player on that Cornell team. They're not bringing too much back. And the kid shoots 40% from three. He can move with the ball in his hands. He can dime people up, like lethal in transition. I mean, look, Cornell may not be good next year, but
Probably not.
Nazir Williams is going to be outstanding, and he is going to put up some absolutely absurd numbers for this Cornell team. Like, I would not be shocked if he averaged 20 a game for this Cornell team. They're not that good, and he is that good. And, you know, it's kind of other than Yale, it's kind of a bit of like why am I blanking on the word? Trust the process. Oh my goodness. Rebuilding period. That's what I was going for there. It's a bit of a rebuilding period in the Ivy League. Like, a lot of teams are kind of rolling out younger talent. And, I think that a guy like Nazir Williams, who's already like dominated the conference in a sense last year, at least, from a Cornell perspective, can very easily be the best player in this conference. At least like not from a next level perspective, but I think from like a statistical perspective, absolutely.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Do you have any notes on Nazir Williams or even Chris Mannon for Canal or even Guy Ragland Jr. Metcalf?
Nazir was the one that stood out, and it was kind of hard not to just be infatuated, there's the word, with just how with his game, with especially his scoring game. 97th percentile pick and roll ball handler, 80th percentile spot up, shot over 43% off the catch. He can score on ball, off ball. He was the best athlete on the court for Cornell. He could just put up some monster numbers in the Ivy this year. I don't think it's going to necessarily lead to winning because the rest of that Cornell team is a big question mark for me, and trending the wrong way, unfortunately. But it's kind of hard not to get pretty excited and really impressed with his scoring game. And the playmaking is like what's really there, but then it's who is he setting up? And I'm not sure there. So it's kind of hard to find that balance between high level scoring guards and volume scoring guards like him in leagues like this when they don't necessarily have the shooters that a team like Princeton or Yale has, where they can spread around to deadly shooters. So I'd like to see a little more playmaking from him, but the scoring versatility from him is really, really impressive and pretty rare for a league like the Ivy.
Yeah, losing Dolan for them is going to be kind of an underrated hit here for like some of these smaller conference wise. 42% shooter from three last year. So losing anybody that's shooting that well from deep and a 2.5 assist to turnover ratio guy. It's going to be tough to win even, they only were able to win, 7 games in conference last year, and losing their best player beyond Williams is going to be tough to kind of supplement that scoring and that efficiency. But some other guys that are kind of top of the line in this conference in terms of scoring, we can kind of clump them all together. Keno Lilly Jr. out of Brown, Clark/Kurt out of Penn, and Geronimo Rubio de la Rosa out of Columbia. Some mouthful names here, but Metcalf, do you have any notes on any of these three guys? Though I'll give you my kind of rundown on Rubio de la Rosa for Columbia. It's kind of what we've been talking about with these like teetering towards upperclassmen. He's going to uprising junior, creates the ball, creates plays well off the dribble, a little bit more on ball than a lot of these guys we've been talking about that are undersized guards. But just generally going to be a put ball and hoop guy, not going to make a lot of mistakes. And I think looking at a team like Columbia, who is very, very young, a lot of sophomores, a lot of freshmen, could be an interesting piece. I think he'll put up a lot of empty numbers, though, similar to Lilly did on Brown and Kurt did on Penn. I don't know. Julian, got any notes on any of these three guys?
Yeah, Keno Lilly's fun. He's like, the small guard that runs around the court, does cool things with the ball every once in a while, and scores some nice buckets. I think he's going to be on my first team. Like, I'm more excited about a guy like Chizakara, who is like, 6'8", coming off a great season where he kind of showed a lot of potential at Harvard. Like, he's a guy who, can dominate in the post, moves really well. I really like him on defense. Like, that's a guy I'm excited for. Keno Lilly Jr., like small guard shoot ball, not as much. I don't want to summarize, guys up that quickly, but it kind of is like, you know, he worms his way around and finds a lane and shoots a nice shot. So
Yeah. Do you think there's any Akpara upside as a prospect wise? He's only gonna be a sophomore.
yes. I mean, Harvard had a lot of seniors graduate, and I think he was probably the most promising freshman on that team. So I think he's going to get a lot of run this year. I think if he can turn into a shooter. At 6'8", the way that he moves, the way that he cuts, I really like this kid. He was I watched Harvard play Kansas a while back. I kind of rewatched that game from early in the season when Harvard gave them actually a run for their money, honestly, which was surprising given that they were out in Lawrence. And he wasn't like the main guy by any stretch of the imagination, but every time he was on the court, I was like surprisingly impressed in the little flashes that I saw of what he could do. And that was early in the season. I'm sure that as the season went on, he got a lot better. But he's going to be the main. I mean, they're getting Lewis Lesman back, who only played like 5 games for them last year. I think he got hurt. But, I do trust in Tommy Amaker as well to get the most out of him. Tommy Amaker has, had some great Harvard teams in the past, and he's been there for almost, forever, probably almost as long as I've been alive. So they're an interesting one, and it is a really young conference this year. I don't know if we're going to touch on Dartmouth at all, but there's a few young guys I like for Dartmouth as well. That they have a few good sophomores.
Go
but
ahead.
Yeah,
Give us your Dartmouth stuff. These are a lot of teams for your reference, Metcalf, that I assigned Julian very early because at the end of the year last year he's kind of absent. This is kind of his section of the podcast where I get to sit back and listen to all the homework that he caught up on. So
No, I love it. I need an Ivy League refresher. So
exactly, that's why we're here
with it.
So Dartmouth, this is my little Dartmouth piece. Dartmouth was not good. I'll put it that way. But so they had Brandon Mitchell-Day, who was the guy who probably got the most run, but I was honestly the least impressed by. 6'8", athletic, cannot shoot to save his life. He is probably going to be utilized a lot more as a post-up guy. I think they've got another kid, Jackson Monroe, who I actually really liked, who's going to kind of I think he can be a really good 6'9", Reed Bailey facilitator out of the high post. So he's going to be interesting. Again, all 3 of these guys are sophomores. And the third guy, I only he barely played last year, this kid, Jaden Williams. But every time he touches the court, it's exciting. He can shoot. He's an electric guard, really high motor defensively, really quick. I don't know how much playing time he's going to get this year. I have him as my most improved player just because I was really excited in the limited amount of time that I got to see him. And those 3 guys were kind of the main sophomores for Dartmouth. So we'll kind of see. I think it's going to take another year for that Dartmouth team to gel, but I don't think they're going to be quite as bad as Cornell or maybe Brown or Penn.
A struggle. I mean, Penn has the only transfer practically in the entire conference.
I don't know if you saw Metcalf. I put that guy Johnny Walter by default.
Yeah, you guys seemed really pumped about him.
I mean, is there really a choice? He came from Northridge, which I mean, shout out to California Northridge. Couldn't give me a shout as a grad assistant or a volunteer VC this year, but it's okay. Nothing personally. They did send us a gift of Johnny Walter here to the pod. I think legitimately though, the only transfer going into this entire conference, Metcalf, which I don't know, in the day of the transfer era is just interesting. I think it's an interesting anecdote. I mean, that I don't know if you really observed many of the transfers going out of the Ivy League, but the SEC absolutely just scavenged this conference for upperclassmen talent, like you mentioned, really at the top. A lot of upperclassmen generally in the Ivy League and the A10 are going to a lot of these Power 5 schools because they kind of are feeder conferences, like we talked about with the WCC and the MAAC. So a lot of these guys that we're talking about this year, we could be talking about next year at teams like, Florida, North Carolina, Duke, a lot of these schools that are looking for guys to fill in gaps on their roster. I don't know. Is there anybody else that stuck out to you, Metcalf, that you want to give props from the Ivy League, or do you got anything that you want to plug, work that you guys have got going on at No Ceilings before we kind of send this thing off into the abyss?
Yeah, no, I just appreciate you guys having me on. Had a blast as always. Yeah, just noceilingsnba.com. It's 100% free. We're gonna be kicking up to 5 days a week in the next, I think, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I should probably know that off the top of my
Big
head.
things going on over there.
Yeah, so we,
like in
we
the last week, it's gone kind of off the chain.
yeah, we got some fun announcements coming. I just had my NBL Blitz recap go up there today. Or by the time you listen to it, it's up. So go check that out. A lot of fun talent over in Australia this year. Yeah, just keep an eye out for all of it. You follow all of that at No Ceilings NBA on Twitter.
Believe it or not, Julian's the first person that I heard say that Alexander Sarr could be a top 3 overall pick this year. He's the first person. I'm saying that for certain. And Bobby Clement's a guy that we've been on, just on the fan train of since the minute he touched the court for Wake Forest. So definitely be sure to check out and keep up what's going on with the NBL. And there's nobody else better to hear it from than Tyler Metcalf. And we thank you absolutely for your time. I don't know. Those are kind of the closing remarks. It was a good one. And we'll be back again with another couple conferences next week. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. We're off the clock.